Good day, everybody. Welcome to the Entheogenic Esquire attorney Greg Lake. Good to see everybody here already today. With yesterday's live stream, and we're going to keep this thing going. As indicated, today I'm going to talk about specific allegations related to fraud and financial wrongdoing aimed at TPUSA, and this is going to be during the pre-2020 period. When people like William Montgomery and some of the early TPUSA insiders were involved. After Barron's live stream last night, where he talked about the hold on just a second before I get the name wrong here. What's his name? Oh, Doug DeGroot. So last night, Barron was discussing Doug DeGroot, who was Charlie's financial advisor and also someone serving, I think, as secretary of the board at TPUSA. And Barron had pointed out that there's seemingly some potential conflict there with that financial relationship, both between Charlie and as it related to serving on TPUSA. So my attorney curiosity got the best of me, and I really just wanted to look up who Doug was. And in that search, I came across particularly a ProPublica article from 2020. Apologize. But the article really discussed kind of the insider transactions that were occurring apologize, my light's a little screwy. But is discussing the insider transactions that were happening at TPUSA, particularly early on there in the life cycle, and actually got some good commentary from legal professionals, accounting professionals, former state attorney general attorneys, commenting on their thoughts and feelings about what was, at least then for sure, the appearance of potential fraud or impropriety on behalf of TPUSA at this time. And so I want to go through these things. And one of the reasons it really sparked my interest is I've ever since the other day when we were shown the video of Charlie stating that, hold on just one second. We'll just turn this off. Okay, apologize. So anyways, we saw the video the other day with Charlie, who was talking about he was fearful, and I believe this was in 2024 after the Trump election, but was fearful of, if Trump would have lost, that he felt he might be going to prison. And in fact, he admitted to crying a bit because of that, because he was so happy and joyful and grateful that Trump had won. And obviously we've looked at post 2020 stuff, right? It's been covered pretty extensively about the different financial and other political activity restriction violations that we've been seeing. And so I'm really, this is obviously going a little bit pre to 2020, but I really just wanted to get an idea of, how long had these types of things been going on. I'm still trying to assess how, part of it Charlie was, how knowledgeable he was. I know that question's really been floating around too with the various content creators on YouTube. And so this is really what spurred me to really look into this. But again, I think also covering the claims and allegations made in this article and these other materials is really just another good teaching moment here. I think you'll see is I'll be able to explain maybe a little bit more, a little bit clearer on what makes some of these transactions, at least the appearance of them, to appear fraudulent or potentially violative of the tax code. And so that's another reason why I really wanted to chew on this subject today. And obviously once we get that done, we're going to hop back over and we're going to talk again about accountability. What are the prospects for accountability moving forward? Obviously, we've already kind of written off the IRS, the DOJ, and the federal government. I'm going to talk a little bit more today about Indiana's attorney general. But really, we're going to focus on Arizona's attorney general. And I'm also going to comment a little bit more about the idea of the class action. And ultimately, today, we're going to end on, a suggestion by me, a potential community call to action of what can be done for those donors and other people who feel that they've been wronged through TPUSA's work, collecting donations, etc. And yeah, we're gonna end it there today, and proceed from there. Tomorrow, I'm really gonna start. I'm gonna go back over and start talking about the news media and the Tyler Robinson trial. We're gonna really dig into the arguments there from the defense versus the news media versus the prosecution. on trying to, obviously the defense is trying to keep the news media more or less trying to keep the whole proceeding private. So anyways, like, comment, subscribe, all the support I can get be greatly appreciated. My subscribers so far, I think y'all know I put a lot of work into this. I really do try to bring a apolitical, objective perspective, and always looking to turn these things into teaching moments. And so I feel like y'all are at least in the comments, expressing that you're learning a lot, and that really fills my heart. Thank y'all very much. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump right in. So I wanted to start and just go over just one more time, just a quick list of the kind of subjects that we're going to be touching upon, digging into the pre-2020 allegations levied against TPUSA and its insiders for questionable insider transactions and even potentially fraudulent tax returns. We're going to talk about the auditing stuff too, give y'all a little bit better idea of what the law and requirements around nonprofit financial auditing is. What does this information tell us about Charlie's knowledge of potential illegal or fraudulent conduct or practices at TPUSA? Do these pre-2020 articles and publications factor into Charlie's statement, like I said a bit ago, where he expressed that he cried when Trump won the 2024 election because he thought that he might go to prison? So was he looking, basically, I'm sure he was cognizant of these things, right? So we're going to talk about that, if he was, and how that might have factored into, the statements that we heard from him. We're going to look at, again, we're going to keep asking this question forever. How in the hell did TPUSA, how have they evaded investigation and enforcement this long, especially now? I mean, I just keep digging up stuff. I mean, almost from the beginning, there were things being pointed out in pretty popular media about potential wrongdoing here, right? So we're going to continue that conversation about how the hell have they evaded enforcement on these things. And so, and then we're going to, again, jump on over and look at, what are the prospects of Indiana's Attorney General perhaps trying to do an investigation or enforcement under Indiana state law. Then we're going to jump over and say, well, what about Arizona Attorney General? Maybe they might be willing to do something if the public, invokes their power correctly, right? And just so we're aware, state attorney generals have the regulatory authority over nonprofits within their state. Now, they don't have the specific authority to, for instance, enforce the tax code, the Internal Revenue Code. But as we'll learn today, still those Internal Revenue Code violations can help form the basis for certain matters that the attorney generals can regulate on. And so we're going to discuss that again as well. And again, then we'll flip on over to, the class action. We'll talk about that a little bit and end up with the call to action that I've been working on, at least in my head, over the past week or so. So let's jump right in. As previously stated, the main article I'm going to be kind of referencing stuff from today was a 2020 ProPublica article that was specifically talking about TPUSA. As a matter of fact, I've got the title here. It's titled, "At This Trump-Favored Charity, Financial Reporting is Questionable and Insiders Are Cashing In." Okay, so that was the name of the 2020 ProPublica article, where I really was pulling a lot of this information off of. Obviously backed it up with some of my also research and knowledge in this space. And so anyways, the article, as we've spoken, right, at length here about the substantial and very close ties between Charlie Kirk, the Trumps, both President Trump and Trump Jr., TPUSA, and other related entities, both in terms of raising funds, breaking the political restriction, helping the Trump campaign. And so there's just been, and everyone I believe is aware that there is a very, very close, relationship there. And I think we would be amiss to not associate the non-enforcement and non-investigation that we're currently seeing on that, right? On that close relationship between the current administration, the current Trump administration, and the Turning Point, not just TPUSA, but Turning Point entities and other Turning Point insiders. But anyway, so this piece from ProPublica really, and I apologize if y'all hearing the construction people are coming in and out. But this article really started at, making the point that, hey, these are very closely connected entities with the Trump campaign, with the Trumps, insiders, etc. The allegations being discussed in the ProPublica article were really they revolved around insiders like Montgomery. They talked about who else? Stacey Sheridan. They also pointed out some of those transactions, which I know have been covered pretty extensively. These were pre 2020 transactions, so we will, discuss them too because the article did. But, anyways, again, as we'll see, they make great points, and they actually reached out to legitimate experts for comments, both attorneys and accountants, on the appearance of these things. And, again, we're not crazy for asking the questions that we are. And these same types of questions have been being asked and have been, brought to the public's attention for quite some time, actually. So wanted to put that out there too. According to the article, William Montgomery, which again, that's Bill Montgomery for those who might not be, acutely aware, is the older gentleman who I guess found Charlie Kirk and then, from what we know, encouraged him not to go to college, set up TPUSA, and traveled and, was with him while he presented at these college campuses for the first, I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 years, if I remember correctly. But anyways, that is really that situation there. I think it's what really got, outside investigators and media personalities, really looking into this thing. It says that, according to the article, William Montgomery, he had a printing, payroll processing, and fundraising companies that he had secured lucrative deals with TPUSA. So this man who holds many high up positions in TPUSA then secures a very lucrative deal for outside companies that he owns and or is affiliated with TPUSA, right? And so as we've learned before, and we'll talk a little bit more today, him being on the board and serving these executive positions under the tax code for sure puts him in a situation where, is it totally illegal to do business with like a board member or an executive's outside company? No. However, there is very strict conflict of interest rules, and TPUSA should have a policy that needs to be followed. Proper recusals need to be made. And most definitely, the contract at the end needs to be at least fair market value, if not better. Again, in order to evade being labeled under the tax code a excess benefit transaction. Okay. So the article also reported that TPUSA, and this is just according to the article, and again, they've as we'll see, they cite to actual professionals who substantiate what they're saying here, but they claim that, TPUSA has also made misleading assertions about its finances to state and federal regulators, according to both interviews and an examination of the tax and business records. So we'll talk about that. Just so we're aware, the IRS itself doesn't have a requirement that nonprofits have like a fully independent accounting done. Actually, it's a whole cabal of states, maybe a dozen or more states that actually require that if you're a nonprofit operating, collecting donations within that state, that you must submit annually a independent third party, audit statement. And so what they're saying, and now I will say this, is that the IRS does kind of keep track of that to make sure that if you're operating in the states that you are doing those audited financial statements, but really it's state law requirements in certain states that those statements be submitted. And so as we'll learn in a minute, the authors of this article and these experts had reason to believe that Kirk, specifically on behalf of TPUSA, had made, false certifications about these audited financial statements. And we'll learn in just a minute why they think that this could potentially have been fraudulent. William Montgomery, Bill Montgomery, by the way, was serving at the relevant time period we're discussing now, I think from roughly 2015 to maybe 2019 and maybe even before then, but I'll have some more specific dates in a second. But during this time, he was serving as a board member, as the treasurer, and as the secretary of TPUSA, which means that, obviously being on the board, he has great influence, especially over the lucrative contracts period TPUSA engages. But also as the secretary and the treasurer, he would have more or less sole control and custody over the financial statements and the corporate records at TPUSA, and if he served on any of the other related entities, right? So again, in a very specific position to it's why the IRS has these rules, right? Because it's just the potential for abuse of taking tax exempt monies that are earned through donations and trying to get it into your personal pocket as much as possible, as quick as possible, right? There's just a lot of room for abuse there. And I think what we're going to see is that it's the appearance of what was going on at TPUSA prior to 2020 definitely fits the appearance that there was some type of wrongdoing, financial misconduct, or fraud going on. Again, allegedly. So again, William Montgomery serving in those serving in those three positions, particularly if we talk about the treasurer, he would be responsible, right, for ensuring that TPUSA gains these annual independent third-party certified financial statements audits. Okay. And so from 2015 to 2019, per the IRS's rules for certifying tax returns, William Montgomery certified that the financial statements, okay, so when the IRS tax returns were submitted for those years, okay, 2015, 2019, I believe the article was stating that William Montgomery certified that those statements had been audited by an independent financial accountant. So let's talk about whether, and the main issue there with these audit statements are, was the third party auditor truly an independent auditor? Okay. So early investigators noted a very close business relationship, okay, between William Montgomery as the treasurer, secretary, board member of TPUSA and the outside audit firm, which was the Stapleton Group, okay. And so the Stapleton Group, according to this article, was obviously an accounting firm, and William Montgomery had a very close relationship with, I think, both Stapleton and the firm, in that he served as the business development advisor for the Stapleton Group, this auditing firm, which part of his duties, right, in that position was bringing clients to the auditing firm, right? So can you kind of see where that starts to get a little quirky? Is that here this guy is working for this supposedly independent accounting firm, but also being the treasurer, secretary, board member at TPUSA, choosing to pay money to do audit statements for this outside company for which he has a very close business relationship and is doing work for. And as a matter of fact, the same work he's being paid to do is along the lines of why TPUSA is being brought to the Stapleton Group as a client for these audited statements. And so the relationship between the two was considered by many, as we'll see, so a lot of these experts considered this a significant tie, right? This is significant, how close William Stapleton was with the Stapleton Group, the outside auditing firm. Robert Stapleton, the auditing firm's principal, okay, handled both TPUSA's return, and he also worked as Montgomery's personal tax preparer. So again, just establishing the copious amounts of business ties and links here outside of this is just an independent third-party auditor. At the time when this investigation was going on, according to the ProPublica article, they had reached out to both William Montgomery and Stapleton for comment. But hey, they didn't respond. What did they do? Well, they handed responding over to our favorite public relations person, right? Andrew Colvett. Andrew Colvett got to give us responses on behalf of these two gentlemen, and, answering the inquiries about potential financial or auditing impropriety. So what did our buddy Colvett state whenever inquired about, this relationship? And it's probably what you could suspect, right? What did he say? He goes, he stated that Montgomery was not compensated for the referral for TPUSA. So again, I mean, we don't know 100% whether that's true or not, but it's just kind of one of those things like, okay, so dude is employed and working with this outside group for business development to bring clients to this auditing firm. Somehow, for some reason, though, this client all of a sudden it just didn't get compensated for it. And moreover, with that being said, while he might not have, and Colvett, just so we know, goes on to say that, Montgomery's pay, rate there at the Stapleton was commission based only, right? So I guess in a roundabout way, what Colvett is trying to suggest is that out of all the business development that Montgomery did for Stapleton, magically this one transaction, you don't need to give me a commission for that, and as true as that may be, right, I think we can all understand that just because a commission didn't come earmarked for the TPUSA referral specifically, does that mean that there was not other forms of remuneration that came to William Montgomery for that referral, even though it might not have been specifically earmarked as referral fee for TPUSA? Well, that's a question that, is sort of out there now. We don't have obviously the information to answer it yes or no, but just wanted to put that in your head that, just because it was like, oh, well, you didn't get a commission for this, doesn't mean they're out of the weeds on whether this might constitute an excess benefit transaction or not. Okay. I just want to make that clear. So let's see. Colvett went on to say, yeah, okay, here we go. And this is another reason why it just becomes all that more believable. According to Colvett, Montgomery was just serving in this business development capacity, just in his spare time. He's just working, doing this in his spare time, for a commission, commission basis only, again, and maybe he was, but to me, it just, I don't really buy that too much. Just my own personal opinion on it. And, is that influenced by some of the other perceived misdirection and lies that I think Candace has at least pointed out some lies of Andrew Colvett, even here in the more recent history. Yeah, it influences whether I believe that or not. And I'm tending not to specifically believe it too much, but that's really neither here nor there particularly, but just wanted to throw it out there. So the article, ProPublica, they went and talked to an Ohio State University accounting professor named Tazaki Zach. According to Zach, quote unquote, if Montgomery has a strong relationship with the auditor, okay, then there is a clear conflict. Okay, there is a clear conflict. And other than an auditor being hired, okay, there should be no other relationship between the auditor and the nonprofit. Okay. And so that, and when we talk about general nonprofit compliance, what is, best practices, because in a lot of things, especially in the nonprofit world, right? I think y'all could probably see this too, is that, a lot of times it's the most correct route is to lean into best practices, because sure, some things, even things that we don't like that we see from TPUSA, aren't necessarily illegal, right? So it's like, sure, you can do those things, but at the same time, you're not winning a bunch of fans over in the public. Okay. And so the way I've always described this to my clients in the nonprofit realm is that, doing best practices will, one, make sure that you're legally compliant, but it also makes you look like you're morally compliant, right? And so, because a lot of times, again, nonprofits can engage in certain behaviors that, while legal, just don't give a good appearance. And moreover, when the IRS is actually doing its job, okay, stuff that you're doing that's otherwise legal could still be the impetus for an IRS audit, okay? And we want to avoid those at all costs. And so, again, leaning into best practices. And so best practices in this situation would have been to say, look, William, we appreciate that you have a connection to, and I'm sure that the Stapleton Group's a badass auditors and badass accountants, man, I'm sure they're top notch. And maybe you got some other nonprofit friends we can refer them to, but because you've got a relationship with them, we're going to need to step outside the box. What this accounting professor was saying is just real simple, like if you're going to hire a third party independent auditor, the only relationship that person or firm needs to have with the nonprofit or its officers or directors is that relationship. We're hiring you to do the audit. Simple as that. Okay. That, and just, you just avoid a lot of bullshit that way, right? Like this, like me, 7-8 years later, reading about this, telling y'all how crazy and potentially wrongful the conduct was, had best practices been followed, none of this would have been come to fruition, in my opinion, anyways. Right. And that's just assuming what I know, right? And I think what at least Candace is showing is that, IRS violations is really probably just the tip of the iceberg. Just my opinion, allegedly. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg what some of these people were truly up to. Okay, and then the ProPublica people also spoke. And this is one of my favorite quotes that they got here, because we're going to be talking about, right, the Arizona, Indiana Attorney General in a minute. But they actually went to a former New York State Attorney General, a person that worked in the Attorney General's office, that's allegedly, presumably knowledgeable on these types of matters, stated very plainly, quote unquote, Turning Point's audit arrangement does not pass the smell test. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. Does not pass the smell test. If an attorney general looked closely, they would find it's not independent. Okay, so for purposes of these, okay, so right now, and let's just draw a really quick dichotomy, real quick. What is the standard for being independent when we're talking about state level auditing reports that need to be turned in, submitted by nonprofits? And then what's kind of the level of insiderness that the IRS has for its interested transaction thing are two separate things. And what I'm trying to tell you is that most state the standard for independence for auditing firms at the state level for nonprofits is a much lower. I say much. In my impression is that for the most part, it's going to be a lower threshold or burden, meaning that less of a connection is needed for them to say that's not independent. And so what this New York Attorney General, former Attorney General employee attorney is stating is that just based upon the facts that we just discussed and what is actually known, would probably vitiate a finding that this was actually independent in many states and presumably New York, from what they're saying. And so just that alone means that way more likely than not, TPUSA has submitted audited financial reports to a whole plethora of states that probably were violative of their state level requirements at that time, and probably now too. So anyways, wanted to point that out. And pass the smell test. Why do I want to mention that real quick? And Barron also hits on this too a lot in his live streams. As attorneys, we're lacking a lot of the information that we would need to be able to say for sure, whether like fraudulent, things of that nature. And so a lot of what we're commenting and opining is the smell test, right? It's kind of and I've said this before, from a bird's eye view, what does this look like to us? As experienced attorneys in these matters, which I'll have called and will continue to call the smell test. And just like this New York Attorney General is saying it doesn't pass, I wholeheartedly agree. They actually went a little bit further and opined that had some of these attorneys in these Attorney General office peeled back the layers and just taken a brief look at this, they probably would have found that it wasn't independent and therefore not a legally sufficient auditing report or statement to have been submitted at the time. So after this, according to the article, Stapleton, so apparently Montgomery had a LinkedIn profile where, everyone's LinkedIn profiles list, every single job or position they've had for the last 10 million years plus some. Well, apparently Montgomery had it listed on there that he was Stapleton's business relations development manager, whatever that title is, I said, right? Well, had it there on LinkedIn, and apparently a letter surfaced from Stapleton to William Montgomery asking him to remove that from his LinkedIn profile. And this article reports that he had not removed it, at least at the time that this article came out. And so, again, here's my question. If Stapleton was knowledgeable, which he definitely should have been, on the standards for independence, particularly in Illinois, I think he's an Illinois accountant. Illinois requires an independent audit statement, right? I mean, certainly he should have known and understood that relationship with William Montgomery could have compromised or did compromise the independence of the audit. Definitely should have known that. Definitely, but because it kind of goes on both sides here, right? It's William Montgomery surely asked them to do it, but Stapleton could have refused too. And being an accountant, I'm definitely going to impute knowledge or, should know upon Stapleton to have, again, just based on what we know, my opinion is that he should have not followed through or gone through with that deal. And I know it's hard. I mean, you want as much business as you can as an accountant for sure. But look, sometimes it doesn't pass the smell test, right? And while Stapleton might not have gotten in quite as much trouble potentially as TPUSA in terms of tax exempt status, stuff like that, they had on the line. Certainly, the whatever the licensing board in Illinois for accountants, I'm almost sure that one of their accountants entering into this type of arrangement could potentially be a strike on the license there. So, you know, and we'll learn in just a minute. I'll talk about the fact that Stapleton's license wasn't always firm up and down during this whole period. So give me just a second. We'll talk about it. Um, in 2019, investigators, okay, so in 2019, they say that Stapleton provided an audit submitted in Illinois without a current license. So basically in 2019, the audit report submitted by TPUSA, which was done by Stapleton, allegedly, was done while his license was not in good standing. And so they actually submitted an audited form. And granted, TPUSA might not have necessarily been aware of this at the time, but they submitted a form, right, an audited statement to the Illinois Attorney General, which was done by Stapleton when his license wasn't in good standing. And so that, according to the article, was enough to invalidate the actual financial statement. So again, I don't think anything's ever really come of this, but the article surely points it out. And and let's be honest, just because his license might not have been in good standing does not equate to this was a fraudulent tax return or auditing statement or audited statement, right? But still, the law has requirements, and it's like, not only was he not independent per se from what we're seeing, he didn't even have his license at the time. So it's just these one after another with TPUSA and these insiders wanting to keep the business so bad that they're willing to really brush aside some pretty clear state and federal laws in order to push this forward, just in my opinion, based on my perspective from what I've seen, allegedly. So anyways, let's keep going. According from the financial records from 2017 to 2019, Bill Montgomery's printing firm. So apparently he had a printing firm that TPUSA hired. I would assume that they did a lot of flyers. I want to assume that he actually did some work. Okay. So I'm going to assume that there were actually some things printed here. Okay. And in all honesty, I would assume TPUSA doing door-to-door campaigns, stuff like that, they probably had a lot of flyers, going to campuses, printing out flyers. So I'm going to assume that's probably what this was. However, they reported that over the course from 2017 to 2019, his printing firm was paid $430,000 for printing services. And then apparently Montgomery also leased an office space to TPUSA for $25,000 was the total amount paid over that time period. So again, do we know that William Montgomery is obviously a disqualified person in terms of the Internal Revenue Code as it relates to these transactions. We're going to talk in a minute about ways that you can kind of steer around that with a proper conflict of interest policy and following it. And we'll discuss that in a second. But again, it's kind of like the 430K, although on its face, we can't say whether that was above or below fair market value. And that's more like when I keep saying we don't have all the documentation. We just don't know what the terms of the contract was, what was actually delivered and stuff, because we might look at it and maybe this was a hell of a deal, and in that instance, just because William Montgomery is part of the board and executive doesn't invalidate that transaction and doesn't necessarily put the tax exempt status at issue, because ultimately, as we'll see, if the transaction is beneficial, very beneficial, for instance, it's way under, they charge way under market value, so TPUSA is getting a great deal, then that's a good thing. And that's why the law does allow for those things to be steered around at times, because you never know. And a lot of times it is the insider who can get incredible deals on things for the nonprofit. At that point, it's really, where's the person's heart at? Are they really there to serve the nonprofit and try to get them the best deal possible? Or are they there to enrich themselves and take all that tax-free money and pay it to that company so that way it comes back to their pocket, right? So that's kind of the dichotomy there. And it really boils down to integrity and morals at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. It really does. because the potential and actual abuse, the potential there is very great in nonprofits, particularly with churches. And I know I've talked about that before. I might mention a little bit more later, but especially with churches. Why they didn't set up Turning Point Faith as a church is completely beyond me. I mean, I'm very grateful they didn't, because it would have made it a lot harder to conduct any investigation. But if they would have, man, they really could have done a number. Really could have done a number, in my opinion. In my opinion. Over that time period, so while Montgomery, this 2017 to 19 time period, while Montgomery serving on the board, serving in 2 different officer roles, treasurer, secretary, his outside printing business has made $430K in 2 years, earned $25,000 in office rent in 2 years, and he made $200,000 personal salary over those 2 years. So again, we can't necessarily say, like, for instance, with the salary, whether that amount was particularly over market value. I'll just say, smell test wise, my general understanding of normal, especially back then, inflation is a thing. And so, rates back then were obviously presumably a bit lower than they are now. And yeah, just 200K seems very high, even for someone serving as a treasurer and a secretary. And just so we know, normally the board positions are non-compensated. On most nonprofits, board members are not compensated. They can recover cost and expenses for, serving as a board member, but normally it's not compensated. It's a charity position most of the time. And that's because board meetings don't occur all that often and don't require just a ton of rolling up the sleeves work of the board members. It's mostly on the executives. So really, when we talk about the $200,000 salary for William Montgomery, that's just understand that we would hope that him serving as a board member in no way factors into that. And you might be saying in your head, because this is another thing I want to let you know, is that in a nonprofit, particularly executive salary should be set by the board. Okay, so that would mean that we have a situation where William, God, look at me. William Montgomery could have potentially voted on his salary, right? So that's the potential too, right? Is that you're serving as an executive, because, you can serve as an executive and also be on the board of a nonprofit. You certainly can. But again, when it comes to setting your salary, there needs to be an appropriate conflict of interest policy that's being followed. That person should recuse themselves from the vote, meaning that if you're serving on the board and your salary vote comes up as an officer, that person should be recusing themselves and not voting. And then hopefully, right, if that person recuses themselves, a quorum majority would still exist in order to pass the resolution. Okay. What do I mean by quorum majority? So a quorum majority, like if you have, let's say you had 3 board, that's the easiest way to do it. Let's say you got 3 board members. Under most sets of bylaws, you're going to be looking at a quorum majority being 2/3 of the people there to transact business, meaning that if 2/3 of the board members, 2 out of 3, approve a motion, a matter, then it's official business. It can be passed. That's a good thing. So what you're looking for is, could William Montgomery have recused himself for having a personal financial interest in his salary vote and still have a quorum majority of board members left to approve that resolution? And I'm surely assuming they did. I mean, they had quite a few board members, so I'm assuming, William Montgomery could have recused himself and that resolution still passed. But again, even at that juncture, is this an instance of overcompensation, an excess benefit transaction, meaning it's over market value for the services or goods, in this instance, services provided to Turning Point USA? Let's see. Let's keep going. So, okay. So I explained that conflict of interest there about the board, right? But being on the board, voting for executive salary. So if you're also earning a salary and you're on the board, you shouldn't be voting on your salary. Hopefully that's pretty self-evident to everybody. And Barron mentioned this last night in the context of, we're talking about the Doug guy being the financial advisor of Charlie and the potential conflict of interest. And Barron referenced, the fact that we haven't been able to see TPUSA's conflict of interest policy. And so just so you know, the IRS does publish a suggested standard conflict of interest policy. And you can look at that online if y'all are interested. I'll just say this: conflict of interest policies is not something that people love or like diving into. Even for attorneys, it can get a little bit confusing in trying to sort those things out. For some odd reason, my brain is pretty good about picking up conflicts of interest and being able to consult and coach clients about them in the nonprofit realm, but not everybody is, right? And so I say that to say that, particularly with TPUSA and them, it's large nonprofits. It's very important to make sure that that confusion does not exist and that you have appropriate attorneys and other professionals that can, consult you on making sure that you're avoiding any conflict of interest. Because again, it can result in loss of tax exempt status. It can result in the levying of excise taxes and a lot of other, not good things come from not following those things. And it's required for tax exempt status under 501c3 that nonprofits have an acceptable, conflict of interest policy. Just so you know. And then according to the Doug DeGroot guy, right, the guy that Barron was referencing last night, who's the investment advisor of Charlie, he was actually quoted in this article about this issue, right, having to do with Montgomery, the outside transactions, his salary. According to Doug DeGroot, who was the board secretary, at least at this time, stated that payments made to Montgomery's companies were done with appropriate recusals. Okay, so that means, again, just so we can review, that means that Montgomery and anyone else who might have had an interest. So let's say there was another board member, TPUSA, who had a financial interest in this outside printing company or in this piece of property that was being leased, they would have needed to recuse themselves too. And normally with recusal also is a requirement of full disclosure. So it would be not only are you recusing yourself, but at the meeting where these things occur, you would be going on the record in the meeting minutes announcing your interest, trying to define it as clearly as you can. So that way, not only is the existence of the interest known, but the extent and nature of that interest is also known. So that way the board members can be fully apprised of the consequences of flowing from approving that transaction. So according to Doug DeGroot, these payments were made with appropriate recusals. Okay, so he's stating that, again, that both Montgomery and any other people who would have had an interest did not vote as board members, and that the fair market value or lower for the goods or services received, that all that was compliant with the conflict of interest policy of TPUSA. So again, we haven't ever been able to see this I haven't been able to see this conflict of interest policy, based upon DeGroot's statements there. Under most normal conflict of interest policies, if that's true, those two things, that appropriate recusals were made and fair market value was achieved or better, then it might not be an issue, right? But again, when we talk about best practices and those things, like best practices probably wouldn't have dictated this unless that printing contract was just stellar. You know what I mean? And maybe it was. It very well could have been. But I just wanted to point that out, right? And again, and this is going into the smell test because, right, what we're seeing needs to be also tempered with what, everyone deserves a right to speak up and defend themselves. And so we're taking Doug DeGroot's statement here as kind of response to the floating allegations at that time, pre-2020. So we will credit it. I don't know if I'm ready to fully assume that that compliance was done there, but I do want to note his statement there for the record. Okay. So again, it's just my personal opinion that this might not necessarily be true, but just so y'all are aware that they did speak for themselves and this is what they said. What's funny is that I take it in somewhere around circa 2018, Montgomery was, I don't think he was removed. I think he basically his board seat was up. The article states that in and around 2018, another insider named Tom Sodica, and I think he's been mentioned quite a few bits on a lot of the content going around, but Tom Sodica, who was then TPUSA's treasurer, so I guess he took over at least the treasurer position, that Montgomery was serving in. But wouldn't you know, as soon as he got the treasurer position, his payroll services company was hired and was paid, I think, approximately $51,000 for roughly a year of payroll services. And so, again, here we go. Yes, a treasurer is an insider. And so his company winning this, payroll services agreement could potentially be an excess benefit transaction. Now, if Tom Sodica wasn't also serving on the board, we wouldn't be concerned with any recusals per se. But to the extent the board, approve the contract, if he's not on it, we wouldn't necessarily be worried about recusals. But, with these things, you always have to understand too, is that, these people run in groups. And so it would be surprising to me, for instance, like with Montgomery's printing services, if he was the only person on TPUSA's board or within TPUSA who had an interest in that. So again, this is just my theorizing here. I wouldn't be surprised if Tom Sadiq's payroll services, that there weren't other people perhaps on TPUSA's board who might have had an interest in it. So again, it's like, I think you can see the need of why these things really need to be, and just so you know, it's probably too much as time has passed to do really much of anything about what I'm talking about today. This is really just some teaching moments and informing ourselves about TPUSA's past. But again, it's, and sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But it did say that Sodica, after this, so I guess after this $51,000 payment was made, after TPUSA had hired this company for a year to do the payroll services, that he sold the company and relinquished all his executive positions at the payroll services company. So, look, I mean, I guess that's good. That's better, right? So now, especially if they're still using that payroll services, I guess that would kind of cut the ties there to making this a potentially excess benefit or interested transaction. But we have to ask ourselves, is that, okay, well, Tom Sodica acquired, this, I guess, seemingly lucrative deal with TPUSA before selling his company. I think we'd be amiss to not assume that the existence of the TPUSA contract affected the sale price a little bit, right? Because, I mean, if the outlook at the company sale is that, hey, this TPUSA contract, maybe there was a term to it, perhaps. And again, this is all just kind of speculation for the purposes of education. What if there was a 5-10 year term on that contract? Well, that's lucrative, right? And if we're looking at least $50,000 the first year, or 5 or 10 years, that's a pretty lucrative deal. And obviously, if we're going to sell a business, purchase a business, that ongoing, contract is something that without question would have factored into the sales price. And so Tom Sodica, very well, and this is just me musing, speculation, could have said, hey, let me be the treasurer, we'll sign this contract, and that will set me up perfect to then sell my outside company for a higher price. So again, just gaming the system, essentially, if that is indeed what occurred. So again, there's speculation in there. I want to point that out, but it's a pattern that we're seeing. Pretty big pattern. Now let's talk about Stacey Sheridan for a minute. So I know Stacey Sheridan's been talked about at length, particularly with like Danks and Project Constitution. And then Candace has stated that she's never felt good about Stacey Sheridan. And it's funny when she says that, because just based upon what I've seen in the documents, in these articles about Stacey Sheridan, I can absolutely understand why she would have had misgivings about Stacey Sheridan. Absolutely. So, at the time this article was, published in 2020, they were looking at the fact that Stacey Sheridan, right? She had the two outside fundraising entities, the GSM and Lion Rock Ventures. Was that correct? Let me make sure I get those names right. Let's see. Lion Rock Ventures, GSM Strategy. So I think both of those companies over this period of time, maybe it was the same 2-year period between 2017, 2019. Don't quote me on that. But anyways, during this time period, they noted that, Stacey, on top of making $180K a year annual salary, serving as TPUSA's senior advancement director, these other two entities had approximately $200,000 flow from TPUSA to them over this time period. And the investigators noted that Stacey Sheridan's name was associated with these entities on the Secretary of State filings. Okay. So again, just a smell test, 1,000-foot view of, doesn't look good, doesn't smell, doesn't pass smell test. Okay. And again, because of the potential for the insider transaction, because Stacey, I don't know if she was on the board at that time, but still being a higher level executive can exert still substantial influence on the board and its decisions, right? So again, in that instance, a good conflict of interest policy would have required that Stacey Sheridan, even as an officer, executive, to have been who really best policy to show up to that board meeting. If these two outside contracts were approved by the board, she should have been at the meeting, or she should have submitted a memorandum or something of that nature, fully informing the board of her position or her interest, might it be her affiliation with these outside entities, which apparently were receiving a lucrative contract with TPUSA. So again, there's ways that you can do these things and still be well within the law. But it again, from an outsider's perspective here, it just smells that probably wasn't full compliance here again. And so, we're looking at that, thinking that now. They were looking at and thinking that then. So I hate to think that we're all super crazy, but hey, we all very well might be. Let's go further. So ProPublica, the ProPublica article author, which by the way, let me give them proper credit here. Mike Spies, Spies, and Jake Pearson. So just wanted to make sure I give them proper credit for the article. So anyways, let's go on. They apparently reached out, right, to both Colvett and Sheridan at the time of this investigation for the article about, specifically about these LLC payments to the GSM Ventures or GSM Strategy Lion Rock Ventures. But both of them did not respond to the inquiries. And as I've said, there's nothing overtly wrong or illegal about these things, about these arrangements or the payments. However, and here's another one of my favorite quotes from this article. They actually went and sought out a former IRS official and a pretty high up IRS official who was actually an attorney within the, all these government agencies, executive agencies will have like an office of their lead counsel, basically their in-house legal counsel. And so this article quotes a person who served in that office of the IRS's chief legal counsel, who obviously would be very, very knowledgeable about these things generally, right? And so here's what they said. He stated that, while these things aren't overtly wrong or illegal, these veiled arrangements, this is a direct quote, might be part of a larger troubling pattern. And then goes on to say that as the number of interested transactions goes up, as the more number of these Stacey Sheridan-like transactions, these William Montgomery transactions with these companies that are owned by the same people running TPUSA or on their board, as those go up, as the frequency goes up, the potential goes up for the possibility that the organization is being operated at the benefit of private interest, for the benefit of private interest, and that those private interests are probably the ones that control the organization. Okay. So, and I think that's probably self-evident, but it's just, this is from an insider from the IRS is telling us that when the IRS is looking at these things, when they're doing their perfunctory or initial investigations, I'm assuming from this statement that the more of these interested transactions that they can identify, the more likelihood, and perhaps this has also played out in the numbers, right? Maybe over time they've come to be able to statistically validate that, the more times, the more interested transactions that you see going on, the more likely that this nonprofit is not being operated for the benefit of the public, but is actually being operated for the benefit of these private interests. And so wanted to bring that up as well here. So let's see. University of Pittsburgh law professor. And I take that back. This was the gentleman that was also part of the IRS's chief counsel's office. Let me see. Okay, so yes, so that was, and sorry I didn't get the name of that former IRS official. That last quote that I just stated, and I apologize about this. That last quoted statement was from a former IRS official. However, the one I'm about to tell you is also from a former IRS official, University of Pittsburgh law professor. His name is Philip Hackney, and he used to work for the IRS's chief counsel's office. But here's his opinion. He opined that the issues related to the independence of TPUSA's audited financial statements makes it difficult to trust what is reported and begins to raise the possibility that it's a fraudulent statement. Okay. So again, something pretty straightforward, seemingly simple as the fact that this auditing firm from the Stapleton Group didn't fit the definition or criteria for independence for a lot of these state attorney general and state laws, that in and of itself is enough to really cause, call in the possibility that even the whole tax returns and the statements that were filed were fraudulent. So again, just a lot of issues that have been going on with TPUSA from a really long time ago, pre-2020. And, it's not just me as some quirky attorney or even like Barron or maybe some of the other attorneys online that have been kind of commenting. It's been IRS officials, like people who really specialize in this nonprofit stuff and who have actually worked for the appropriate regulators are have been opining for quite some time that this isn't right. Something doesn't look right. It doesn't pass the smell test. Okay. And so it's, unfortunately we're here 6 years later, still harping on the same tune. But here in a minute, we're going to transition and see what we might be able to conjure up in terms of maybe seeing some type of investigation, a real investigation or accountability, in this instance. Justice Berserker, I don't know, I just saw this comment, but they asked, have you by chance taught law? So back in 2022, 2023, I taught continuing legal education courses to attorneys in, I did webinar format for attorneys in Washington State and California. And then I actually flew out to Oregon. I got to go teach a continuing legal education course on building and theogenic churches. So it was teaching these lawyers. A lot of it had to do with building nonprofits. But yeah, I got to do it on the Oregon coast. It was gorgeous. We were at this resort and like looking out the window was like this huge boulder that was like larger than my house. It was just so cool. And so, yes, I have taught law to other attorneys. And then I have my Patreon channel too, where I do legal lectures. So yes, I've done quite a bit of teaching. And I really enjoy it. If y'all haven't noticed, I really, really enjoyed this. And so, I've written here, considering the overwhelming amount of alarm bells and expert concerns with the finances and operations at TPUSA and related entities for all these years, how has it been that they have avoided serious either IRS or some regulators investigation and prosecution? It's beyond me. It really is beyond me. I mean, I say it's beyond me. And we'll talk a bit today and on into the future about, and I have before, why I think that is. I think it's because they have a certain class of donors who are very politically connected on both sides of the aisle, state, federal, and local level, who are, obviously very connected. And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle or who's in office, whoever this force is within or connected to TPUSA, it's like body armor, I guess, but let's keep talking because I'm hoping we can put an end to this. Okay. So let's switch up the conversation here and let's switch to what are the prospects for an investigation and potential enforcement in this situation. Because again, I know that is a lot of people, and it's no secret, TPUSA is obviously a very conservative, right-leaning organization. People who've been very entrenched in Republican right-leaning politics are donors to them, small and large. And even those people, right, even with Donald Trump in office, are like, no, we feel played and we are demanding accountability. Okay. And so it's a real issue This is it's become a bipartisan issue essentially. I mean, I think y'all could agree with me on that, huh? This has become a pretty bipartisan deal that we've been looking at, and so let's switch now to talk about enforcement. So, as people, just kind of recap where we've gone in the past, we looked at what's the potential for IRS enforcement, and along those lines, we noted, IRS complaints have been filed. Obviously, me and tons of other content creators have covered how many different articles from the past about these violations. And obviously, I do now believe Charlie was full. And the reason why I really locked into this ProPublica article is because it had legal experts chiming in. And so that made me think that Charlie, with seeing certain legal experts and these other people weigh in that this doesn't look good, I'm almost sure that that probably factored into his "I'm glad I didn't go to prison" statement, in effect. But we're looking, and it's like with the IRS, it's like, are they going to try to do something? Historically, I've done nothing. Somehow, even through the Biden administration, the IRS didn't do nothing. And then we saw the Treasury write that letter from the Department of the Treasury. The Treasury Secretary writes, in response to a request from TPUSA, writes them a letter to say, we're not investigating you, blah, blah, blah. And so, again, that just tells me that we should not be holding our breath to imagine a DOJ or IRS or any other interested federal agency investigation or prosecution in this matter. I just don't. Let's not hold our breath for that. So then we turn and we say, okay, well, what are the other possibilities? And I'm going to talk about the class action too in just a bit. But we looked at it, right, because we had that conversation that day about what is the duties of the attorney generals, right? What is their oversight? They have major oversight duties for nonprofits. State attorney generals generally do, and particularly with assuring that the board of nonprofits appropriately do their job and maintain a certain level or standard of care, and ultimately they're to protect the consumer against unscrupulous nonprofits. Attorney generals are okay, and so you know obviously, because TPUSA is operating in all these different jurisdictions and all these different states, there's all these different attorney generals who probably all 50, right? I think probably all 50 states are operating in. Don't quote me on that, but pretty much every attorney general could potentially have a case to go after Turning Point to the extent that they investigate and find wrongdoing, correct? Well, we do know that, and we kind of squared up and have been zoned in on Indiana's and Arizona's attorney general in particular. And why is that? Well, it's because from a document standpoint or an official standpoint, Turning Point USA is filed and existing in the state of Indiana. Of course, they're also existing and have an office in Arizona, but they're filed as what we consider like a foreign entity. Again, meaning they are established and are considered to be domiciled for the most part, I would say, in Indiana, but obviously have their main office and do a whole lot of transactions and other business in the state of Arizona. So Arizona would be kind of the second in line there. If we're just trying to prioritize a list of which attorney generals would have the most kind of skin in the game, that's how I'm kind of perceiving it. And so, let's talk 1 second about the Indiana attorney general, because even in my last segment, when I discussed this, came to the conclusion that, probably not going to see nothing from them. So, and so I did a little bit of further digging into that and why I don't believe that we would have as a community. It didn't get my red hat banjo. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. And I'm going to talk about the geofencing too, because I know a couple of people were kind of interested in that. But what is it about the Indiana attorney general that gives me pause or reservation that going to them in order to get an investigation or potential, accountability might not be so fruitful. So I started looking into it. And at the outset, I'd like to note, I think everybody's aware of the recent redistricting push by Trump and I think the Republican Party on all these states seeking to redistrict the states, meaning redraw the congressional maps, things of that nature. Well, I think Indiana was one of the states that had been, even their Republican Party was kind of giving a little bit of pushback. So their attorney general, who, by the way, most states' attorney generals are also going to be overseeing elections and making sure that that whole process is carried out appropriately. Um, but TPUSA recently got involved trying to pressure Indiana Republicans into accepting the redistricting map that was being proposed by Trump and others connected with the administration, right? So again, I'm just showing you that like TPUSA is intimately involved in the election stuff and presumably the attorney general in Indiana. And by the way, Indiana's attorney general, his name is Rokita. Is it Todd Rokita, I believe? And I'm sorry, I don't have this written down right here, but I believe it's Todd Rokita. But anyways, Rokita. So when the Charlie Kirk incident happened, and I'm pretty sure most of y'all are aware that there were people who were posting about it, things of that nature. And, some were posting good stuff that were very thoughtful and condolences. And some people were posting some pretty shitty stuff, and even I'll say that, like, you know, I don't like it when people are dying, you like rub it in and stuff, no matter really who they are per se. But some people took it pretty far, even though I do respect their right to free speech. I certainly do. Some for my personal taste, some people took it too far, but I also think that people going after those people took it a little bit too far. And seemingly Todd Rokita was one of those people. It says that he used his office's quote unquote eyes on education webpage to publicize examples of educators who have made controversial remarks about Charlie Kirk. The page, billed as a transparency tool, housed a hodgepodge of submitted complaints about teachers and schools in the past. Now, it also includes a 28 Kirk related submissions as of Thursday afternoon. So, like, he got in on this whole thing about going after and attacking people, trying to get them to lose their jobs and stuff for attacking Charlie Kirk after his death, Okay. So what does that tell me? It tells me that just my opinion, I don't think it would be very fruitful to ask Mr. Rokita to potentially investigate and what's more, even prosecute potentially TPUSA for some of the stuff that we're seeing that we think he probably should. Okay. And please let me know if you're wrong. Maybe there's a statement or some other thing that someone else has seen might indicate otherwise, but my research has showed that, and I'm all about efficiency, right? I'm Doge effort, right? Doge effort on TPUSA accountability, right? That's what we're going for, efficiency. So I'm looking for the most direct, most efficient, and most time sensitive, route to go. And so I don't think Rakita would be that, because I think it would just end up being a really big waste of time, unfortunately. Okay. So again, very much open to being proved wrong on that. And if I am, hey, we might think about reaching out to him, but I just right now I don't see it as working out that way, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry. And I think I told y'all, my mom's side of the family's from Indiana, Evansville, Indiana. So I've spent quite a bit of time in Indiana. I love Indiana. I wish that it was better, that we could look at the AG there and maybe get some accountability. There'd be a little family pride in it there. But I just, as of the state of affairs right now with the current AG, I'm just not thinking it's going to go. Lest I digress. So let's see. And so let me say this too, as before we proceed a little bit further here is, same way with the Epstein files. Okay. And I don't think it takes an attorney or like an experienced investigator or someone with a lot of just super deep knowledge on this stuff to look at these things like the Epstein emails and other evidence, just the same way as you look at a lot of this TPUSA evidence that we've been looking at and analyzing and saying that, yeah, I think there's enough there to warrant an investigation. I certainly think that there's enough there to warrant an investigation. I mean, even though I'm not going to go that far, I'm not too far from just blinging out saying that, yeah, I do believe absolutely that there was some fraud there, but hey, not yet. I do want to see an investigation. I'm not the authorities to charge somebody with fraud or anything, so I'm not going to make that leap. But hey, not to say I'm not in the back of my head kind of close to that. But in any event, there is by far enough information out there in the public, credible information, even information disclosed by them to warrant an investigation. Okay. And just wanted to point that out. So it's like, it's not like we'd be asking, for the moon or something from these people, from these attorney generals, like, and to the extent that we provide them with documentation, witness statements, signatures, we do half their job for them. And so it would be kind of on them at that point to use their power as attorney general with the subpoena and other statutory powers to go and start getting the information that we so badly want to see, that they have the authority to go see, and and see where it goes, right? So that's really what we're asking for here. Let's see. So then I looked. Okay, so again, so we're gonna for at least for the time being write off. We're going to write off Todd Rokita, Indiana Attorney General. We're going to look at Arizona. So who's the Arizona Attorney General? Now, again, I know a lot of y'all definitely probably don't politically align with their Attorney General, Chris Mays. Again, I'm apolitical, so obviously I don't align with them either. I don't align with either one of them. But Chris Mays, her past, her history with the Turning Point entities and people affiliated with the Turning Point entities in Arizona, it gives us a little bit of hope that she might be willing to do something. And why do I say that? Well, as I said, she's a Democratic Party candidate, so obviously a TPUSA. And let me do a really big preface on this. What I'm about to be talking about is going to imply that we use the potentially divisive nature of our political system as a tool, as a means to potentially seek investigation and accountability for TPUSA. I don't like that. I don't like the way that sounds or the way that feels. But we're at the point now where it's like, well, people are reporting that they're currently being harmed. Okay. And that there's stuff going on. So at this juncture, we're really just kind of at our last resort. Okay. So, but I just want to make it clear that it doesn't feel good to me to insinuate that we might use this as like the political divide as a means to an end here, even though I do think that the end is, good for public accountability and transparency. But I just want to point that out. I don't want to be divisive, and I don't want to play into this two-party political divide as much as possible. But we might have to reach in a little bit here, strategy-wise. Okay. So, anyways, let me go on. So the from what I read, Mays was able to secure a conviction against former TPUSA insider Austin Smith in an election fraud case, I think related to the 2020 election. And then she was carrying the torch on the election fraud case against Tyler Boyer and some other TPUSA insiders who, if we remember correctly, right, they were pardoned by Trump at the federal level for these violations. They were charged at the state level. But apparently the Arizona courts pretty much shut it down. And so Chris Mays was kind of rejected at following through with that whole thing. And so the reason why I say this is, again, it doesn't feel good, but it seems that, Chris Mays potentially might want a second bite at that apple. And, again, then you got to ask yourself, it's like, well, if the apple is public accountability and like holding people to the law and effectuating justice, well, is it that bad that we're engaging in kind of this political oriented, back and forth here? So I just wanted to, also point that out as well. Let me see. And so, with the Boyer case, has had some accountability for other election related things with PUSA insiders. Again, it just makes me think that, this person might be a little more motivated at the very least to hear us out as a community, as particularly Arizona based donors and other people within Arizona, part of the public who have, in some way feel they've been harmed or scammed by TPUSA. So anyways, let's move on from there. And again, it's both Republican conservative donors are calling for accountability for TPUSA, even though TPUSAs obviously have been very beneficial to that political party, and I think that says something. Um, and so, how could we go about? So now we're going to transition into how would we go about getting the attention of Chris Mays, the Arizona Attorney General, uh, to the extent that she might be, or her office might be willing to open up an investigation into Turning Point and related entities and individuals, and indeed, if something is found there, to then proceed to prosecution. Well, I can say pretty comfortable that I think that she would proceed to prosecution. Getting her open up the investigation, we'll just have to see. But in order to for so this would really go under a regular kind of consumer complaint in a lot of ways. And just so we're aware, because Mays is Arizona's attorney general, she is really only able to act on behalf of the citizens and the public of Arizona. So people who have been donors of TPUSA in Arizona who feel they've been done wrong, other members of the public in Arizona who think that TPUSA is not doing right or in accordance with state law, state or federal law. Those would be the individuals who would need or want to file these, essentially a consumer complaint with the Attorney General's office. Um, I would propose, if this is something that as a community we're thinking that, yeah, let's put something like this together. I would propose to do it as one big group. I just think it would have a lot of effect if we could do it with one really good presentation. So again, like filing an actual consumer complaint form in conjunction with a well-written letter describing the evidence, describing kind of the allegations and what's been going on, mixed with attached evidence and things of that nature, articles, tax returns, stuff like that. All the stuff we've been kind of reviewing, me and other content creators, like basically creating an investment package for the Attorney General in Arizona to get her to buy what we're selling, that TPUSA needs to be potentially investigated. And so I would propose doing it that way. Now, we could also propose just doing the flood technique, right? Where we get everybody on board, and over the course of a week, their office gets flooded with 1,000 different requests for an investigation looking into the Turning Point issues. So, and please feel free to agree with me. Maybe it would be more effective if we do the shotgun kind of approach at it. I'm liking the idea of us all kind of coming together under the banner. Obviously, I'm not in Arizona. I'm not an Arizona member of the public or donor. But if we could get someone for Arizona, particularly an Arizona donor who'd be willing to kind of, carry the torch, I could work with them and we could draft up a really nice letter. We could do the consumer complaint to look really nice. And then, what I would propose is to open up maybe a Google form or some other kind of digital document where we could collect signatures from people, donors and other people in the public there in Arizona, and then submit that full package to the state attorney general. And I would even be willing, if we're going to do it, to pick up the phone and give her office a call, in regards to the submission. So that's just kind of what I've been looking at and looking into it. One interesting point that, to be quite honest, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that we've really been looking at, a lot of what we want is just the discovery. We want to be able to see a lot of the documents and other things that we haven't been able to see, and aren't entitled necessarily to see, but that the attorney general, like the Arizona attorney general, most doubtedly is entitled to see. And not only that, in most states, the attorney general has the authority to go check out these internal documents without having an initiated litigation, even, from my impression, that they can issue an administrative subpoena to go and look at the corporate records, the bylaws, the minutes, all the contracts, things like that. And so potentially, if these people were to open up an investigation, they could start probably getting a lot of these documents ASAP. Now, the next question that I have that I don't know the answer to, but we'll find out, is if that occurs, are we entitled to see that? Is the public entitled to be privy to the fruits of an attorney general investigation into a nonprofit? That's the question, because obviously I think it would be also beneficial for the community, both in terms of just seeing accountability and just healing from all this, to be able to see those things as in real time as it occurs. And so, yeah, I'll look into that, because I think that's also an important aspect of, if we're going to look to try to hold them accountable one way or another, what are going to be some of also the incidental benefits to whichever route or mode that we decide to go. um One thing I will say is that, the for instance, Erica Kirk's pretty blatant or obvious violation of the political activity restrictions whenever she did, that endorsement of JD Vance. While it's not the Attorney General's job to enforce federal law per se, it is their job to make sure that the board and other people at TPUSA are providing oversight to make sure that those types of things aren't occurring. And so, again, those IRS things are still relevant to the state level attorney general investigation. Um, so, what are kind of some of the things, real quick? I would just written these down. I'll mention them. What are some of the things that we would mention probably in this letter? Well, the hat debacle. I heard someone just talk about the hat debacle, where people donated to get a hat, but either haven't got a hat or got something that they didn't, agree to whenever they made the donation. Anyone who's made a restricted donation that they believe wasn't spent in accordance with the way that they had restricted or wanted it to be spent. Um, Obviously discuss the appearance of, potential excess benefit transactions and insider dealing and stuff like that. Um, you know, Obviously the potential that the board has neglected their duties in many different respects that I've discussed. Um, and then people have been asking me about the geofencing. People wanted to know about the geofencing. And if I'm correct, they did a lot of that geofencing at the Charlie's Memorial in Arizona. And so I'm still kind of looking into the legality there. From what I'm seeing is that generally, if the data isn't like sold or marketed stuff like that, it's legal. However, it's really kind of a tricky situation. And the way I took just my preliminary research, and I'm going to do more, is basically it was like this. It's like, look, because it can get kind of funny whether that's legal or not, it's always best to have some type of agreement, like a user agreement or some type of, acknowledgement by the person that they're going to be geofenced. And so I'll continue to look into it. But, again, that could also be one of these things that could be brought to their zone attorney general's attention that's going on by TPUSA in their state. That could be the impetus of, again, whatever they do, but hopefully at least open an investigation. Let's see. I'm going to, well, I'll save that for the end. Let me talk real quick about the class action. So I did quite a bit of research into the viability of a potential donor, volunteer, member of the public, or a class action, particularly with donors, is really what I was focused on. A potential for a federal donor-based class action lawsuit against the Turning Point entities, federally, nationwide. I'm having a lot of trouble, and just here's the deal. I don't think that the claims are going to be common, meaning that I don't think that they would share enough common legal and factual questions. And there would be the injection of probably 50 different state laws. And I think that these things might prevent those claims from being certified as a class action at the federal level. And as I stated last time, look, ladies and gentlemen, if you think you have some type of legal claim against Turning Point or related entities in regards to a donation that you gave, please see your local counsel, because, one thing I'll say, and I guess I say I feel bad about bringing up the class actions. Webb really had originally brought it up, but I just want to make sure everyone's aware that I'm not going to be like taking that on, this or that. I discussed it, right. I wanted to explore the different possibilities for accountability for TPUSA, but I did say pretty quickly too, I'm in no capacity to really do the class action, but I was capable, and am doing now, commenting on its viability, and giving recommendations to seek local counsel. And I just want to say that even if a federal class action might not be able to be certified, there could be many class actions certified at the state level. Many states also have class action level procedural devices in their civil codes. Um, but again, and that's not to say that the claims don't have merit. It's just being able to certify at the federal level, Rule 23 might be a bit of a stretch. And, with that being said, too, that's why I'm exploring these other options of the attorney generals going those avenues. But, by all means, here's what I would say for sure. If you're a donor that in the recent past, and then the one thing too, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a claim against anybody, but particularly with TPUSA, anybody, there's a statute of limitations. And so again, I encourage you to go seek local counsel just quickly as possible. If you need help finding good, competent local counsel, please email me. I'll be glad to help you in those regards. But if you have a claim and you're really eager to want to go assert it, go get your attorney ASAP and get on that. Perhaps a class action might materialize later, but I just want to let you know that I wouldn't rely on that. So anyways, just looking through my notes, y'all. I apologize for the. So, okay, well, that's kind of nearing the end of my presentation. Hell, we've been going for almost an hour and a half. That's a little bit long. Oh, Carrie Lake, any relation to me? No, not that I'm aware of. Anyways, when I first started researching the Turning Point deal in the 2020 gubernatorial race there in Arizona is when I first learned of Carrie Lake, to be quite honest with you. No, not that I'm aware of. Not that I am aware of. Let me just do the last few little closing things that I have here, and I'll start looking at some of the comments. Me and Tyler, I had another creator reach out to me and wanted me to do a sorry about this, y'all. Man, I feel so bad. Anyways, there is another content creator. His name is Tyler. I don't have his thing right in front of me. I'll let you know, but he's reached out. He's a very nice gentleman. He's reached out to the channel and he wanted to collaborate with me on maybe doing some live streams. So we're definitely working on that. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to prepare the proposed letter and other materials for the Arizona Attorney General. And I think the plan is for us to both do a live stream together and present that letter and have another kind of in-depth discussion about the prospects of accountability investigation, with the Arizona Attorney General. And so, yeah, we're going to, I don't know where Danks went, to be quite honest with you, Miss Susan. God bless him. But Tyler's here with me, and he's a very nice man, and I, for sure will want to collaborate with, for me, y'all, it's not how big you are, it's really where's your heart at. Really, you got one subscriber. If you have a good heart, you have good intentions. I feel that you're here for proper purposes, which I usually, we spoke on the phone, get feeling. I'm here with you. So we're going to do a live stream together, and we're going to talk about this, potentially putting this letter together. And so I just wanted to give y'all a heads up on that. Tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a live stream, and we're going to be going, again, I'll stay this beginning. We're going to be going over, thank you for those kind words, Linda. Yeah, I'm hoping I grow too and do some cool collaborations. But I like to maintain heart-centeredness. Let me tell you this. No joke, saw an advertisement from PragerU earlier today that was telling people, don't follow your heart. They're saying, don't follow your heart because, it's going to ruin the world. And I was like beside myself, like, do what? Like, don't follow your heart. Like, where are we? So I just wanted to mention that. It's really weird. But anyways, I'm going to tomorrow be covering the media, state, and defense motions regarding privacy of the Tyler Robinson proceedings. We'll be going into that in depth. I want to make a correction from yesterday. I thought that for some reason, I had in my mind the Clintons were, and to be quite honest, I was deceived by a video posted on YouTube, which made it seem in the title that the hearing I was watching was one in Congress that the Clintons were testifying at, but apparently that wasn't the case. Okay. But they will be testifying. So it's going to be February 26th for Hillary, February 27th for Bill, testifying in Congress. I will for sure be covering that. I won't be doing it live, but what I'm going to be doing is obviously watching it, taking notes, and then coming back, and we're going to have an in-depth live stream discussion about it and its implications. And then, and so around that time too will be this will be an online court appearance in the Tyler Robinson trial, where the judge will issue the ruling in regards to the conflict of the prosecutor. So it's going to be a little window there. We're going to have a lot of very interesting, legal stuff to really dig into and talk about on both kind of the major subjects we've been touching on, especially with Epstein, which is going to be becoming a major topic on this channel for sure as we move forward. And so that's about it, man. That's about it that I'll have for my presentation today. I'll whip out and take a look at some of y'all's comments. Man, thank y'all very much for being here. I still have yet to grab my Starlink. We do have plans tomorrow morning. We're up and going to go pick that up. I'll try to install it tomorrow. And then they've painted in the podcast studio. So it seems that they are nearing completion as well. So I might be up with the podcast studio here within the next week or so. So stay tuned. Let's look at the comments. Thank y'all. And yeah, if you haven't, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Every one counts for me at this point. So thank y'all. Thank y'all. It really does. Very meaningful. I check my subscriber count several times every day. It keeps me motivated. It keeps me motivated. I'm coming up on 1,000. I think I'm at almost 900. And so I think at 900 and then 3,500 hours of playtime, which I'm nearing that too. I'll be able to have like the partner program where I can monetize and collect super chats. I mean, not that that's like, obviously I'm here going pretty with y'all for nothing. As a matter of fact, I've put a lot of money into this. So I think y'all understand that it's really not necessarily about the money, but it's just a milestone, right? It's just kind of like a milestone to reach that point where you're, we're monetized. But thank y'all for being on the ride. And, man, looking very much forward to this journey. More and more every day, I come to imagine that, as much as I feel like I make a difference doing the civil rights work, particularly doing the pro bono work and stuff that I do, like in the climate, the political, social, legal climate that we're in right now, I'm starting to believe that, on a more broader, level paradigm, that actually doing this channel is going to be where God, wants me to serve the most. So, we'll see how that plays out. But I'm starting to believe that, and I'm starting to really be happy and put a lot of pride in this stuff. It's like, I put a 6-page outline for today. I mean, not like it's, but I just want to let y'all know I put a lot into this. I do care. I want to show up and have a good presentation and stay on point and, bring stuff that's important to you and germane and material for your life and our shared existence here in this country and on this globe. And, hopefully we can get through this, what's probably going to be a rough patch together over the next, through the midterm year and perhaps for a little bit further into the future. We might hit some rough patches. We're kind of in a rough patch, but we're going to stick together and we're going to make it. We're going to do it. And, we're all going to be better at the end of this because of it. I know it. Let's see. Yeah, so Ian Carroll was out for a few days. It subconsciously I noticed that, but it really came to the forefront today when before the stream I saw Susan make that comment, and I did see he was coming on to Tucker Carlson. I can't wait to see that episode. But thanks for pointing that out. Ian is someone I most definitely have followed and look up to in terms of doing content. Thank y'all very much for all the well wishes. Yeah, man. Thank y'all. H-Bug says, yeah, it makes you wonder if it was a persecution complex, or he was afraid under another administration they'd follow up on actual wrongdoing. Yeah, I think that's what it was. I mean, I think that, pardon my language, I think it's probably shitting bricks. Based upon what we know now, I bet Charlie was shitting bricks during the Biden administration. And you know, and maybe there was some resentment in what happened to him, if something happened to him, in the sense that, maybe the people behind it, if they were indeed behind it, felt that, we protected this asshole for all these years. You know what I mean? So like maybe that even factored in a little bit into the decision-making process. Unfortunately, that might have gone into that. Yeah. But yeah, so I would imagine that, especially with that Operation Arctic Frost that I mentioned, and Danks, I think, covered pretty in depth in another one of his live streams. I mean, I read that probably had him shitting some bricks. Thank you, Susan. Let's see. So it seems like y'all are having good, productive conversations too in the chats here, man. That's good. Y'all are getting along. I love it. I love it. Trump better not allow the crooks off the hook if crimes are real and unlawful. Oh, that's right. So tonight, after I do this live stream, I'm going to go handle some stuff. But tonight, I'm going to start unloading the two Trump victim videos that I came across that are, trigger alert. I'll just go ahead and say it now. Trigger alert. But I'm going to do two recorded videos of, showing them to you and just giving you some just really brief, some of my thoughts on it. But I want to throw that out there so that way when we're moving forward in these live streams, y'all will have seen these same videos that I've been referencing, because y'all really need to see them. And the reason why I said this right now, Hoax, is just because, man, the way I think about Trump now, like I don't see him holding anybody accountable. Just to be 100 with you, is like, I think he's so compromised. I don't see him holding anybody accountable, just based upon some stuff I've seen. And I'll show those videos to y'all just so that way we're all on the same page. Well, again, maybe you don't see them the way I do. Maybe you don't believe the girl. Maybe so please feel and think the way that you do. Don't adopt my opinion on the stuff, but I will give you the basis for my opinion when we watch the video together on these recordings. But please formulate your own. By all means, if there's reason that you find to not find these things credible or think some other way, like, please, bring it to the table. Let's talk about it. Because, at this juncture, the truth is just so important. And, the only way in a lot of these instances we're going to get to the truth, right, is by talking it out. And, talking about, well, I saw this, and well, what about this source? Would you know that about them? And just really talking it out and seeing what we can sort out. Because, at this juncture, there's just a lot of misdirection and psyopiness and all that going on. And like, it's overwhelming at times to really think about, like, who is what I'm watching out true? Is this, something that's put out as a misdirection, as a psyop? I mean, it goes through my mind all the time. I would imagine it has to be with y'all too. And so with that being said, the truth is not as straight up and down as we would hope it would be, which would require that in some instances that we actually, take some time to sit down and whip out different facts and perspectives to try to dig for the truth. None of Erica's family went to hospital. Why would the VP of the U.S. take a coffin and a wife out of any state? Stacy was there, though. Yeah, I remember hearing that with Candace the other night. Thank you for justice. Said, I find you so informative and you seem to genuinely appreciate the rule of law that we have Americans desire to maintain. Yeah, I really do. I really do. And I'm not going to lie to y'all, and not to scare you in any way. But I'll just admit that, when I was looking around at our country, particularly, with the ICE raids and, after the Kirk incident where people were like being attacked and stuff like that, like I really, and particularly with the ICE raids, am seeing a breakdown the rule of law. And did it scare me a bit? Yeah, it scared me a bit. And with the Tyler Robinson trial, I see the potential there for a breakdown in the rule of law. And it got me a little bit, my feelings a little scared. And hey, it gave me a little kick to get this channel up sooner rather than later. To be quite honest with you, I was wanting to wait till I got the studio in and all the best equipment and all that stuff. But It's just times didn't work out that way. Times didn't work out that way. So let's see. Uh, I wonder how much does Gaza and Bibi have to do with this? I'm assuming you're referencing just generally the potential uh, misconduct of TPUSA. If that's what you're referencing, I mean, I think that BB, what's going on in Gaza, and the people both stateside and over there supporting that had a lot to do with what we're talking about today and what we're talking about in the Tyler Robinson trial. Um, yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. That's just my perspective, anyways. And as we go forward, we'll talk more about why that is, and I'll start looking at some of the evidence that we have of that. One theory may float is all U.S. taxpayers were defrauded because of tax exemptions. Churches are tax free. Yeah, I mean, just so y'all know, again, like I said, tax churches on a constitutional level are well, I said on a constitutional basis are automatically tax exempt. They don't have to apply. They don't have to do the 1023 form. Um, Automatic tax exemption. They don't have to file annual tax returns, and they are 26 USC 7611. Again, 26 USC section 7611 provides very robust, I'll say it again, very robust protections for churches, associations of churches, all the church categories under 501c3. Very robust protections against IRS audits and inquiries for churches. Okay. So, again, you could just imagine, had Turning Point Faith at that time, 2021, actually done like a association of churches or even a church, the potential for abuse there, you know. So, well, I'm grateful they didn't. I don't know who their nonprofit consultant was there. And I'm not saying they did obviously the way that they're doing is possible to do it that way. It shouldn't be possible to do it in the way that they're doing as far as like going into these churches and turn it into a Trump rally. But as far as some type of subset initiative under TPUSA, yeah, you can do that. Let's see. We are dealing with Mormons and magic underwear. Do we have a chance? Mormons and magic? I guess not. I guess not. With Mormons and magic, the Mormons, magic, and the mafia. Huh? I heard people say that too. Would you be interested in assisting in a whistleblower RICO case? Oh man. It would just depend, Justice. It would just depend. Feel free to email me if you have a specific case that you're wanting to ask about, potentially my participation. Feel free to email me. InthiaJCasquire@gmail.com. I need to check those emails today, by the way. But yeah, send me an email if you want me to at least. I'll definitely take a look and give you my thoughts. Let's see. Yeah, Linda, and I appreciate y'all. Yeah, I can't wait to collab with Tyler. That'll probably be here in the next few days, and I would love to collaborate with some of the bigger content creators, but I'm also very big about standing on my own 2 feet. I'm really big about that too, and yeah, it's okay. It's all good. At the end of the day, I just want the message to get out there. Yeah, it'd be nice if from time to time some of the bigger channels, look at my stuff and take something to attribute it, but that speaks more to their integrity than it does me. And people notice it too, So I had a bunch of people email me about the last time. They notice it, they notice it. So in that vein, I don't get upset because I don't need to. People know. Yeah, it's keep asking about the Charlie Kirk incident related to BB. Sure, he surely came out and tried to have us not believe that pretty quick. Y'all remember that? I don't know. It's very interesting. I see John Robertson here. He put 501c3 and 501c4. Um, I don't know if you were wanting maybe an explanation on that, but just generally, I mean, for our purposes here, the best thing for you to know about 501c3, which would be like TPUSA versus 501c4, which would be Turning Point Action. The main difference there is that, well, there's a couple of differences. One, 501c3s are, charitable purposes, and donations to them are tax exempt. But the trade-off is you can't engage in political endorsements, meaning that you can't get out there as a 501c3 and be making statements or endorsements on behalf or in opposition to, specific candidates for public office. Whereas a 501c4 can, up to 50% of their activities can be that. However, donations to the 501c4 are not tax. You cannot write them off. So that's kind of the mission there. NDA doesn't cover crime. Please tell people they don't know. Oh, yeah. So, just so y'all know, you can't use an NDA to prevent someone from like reporting to investigators illegal conduct. Well, I say that particularly with a subpoena. I know for a fact, like if you get subpoenaed, and you're under judicial scrutiny to like answer questions, you can't hide behind a DM. Here's the basic contract principle really behind it, ladies and gentlemen, is that you can't contract to do something illegal. So if you are under a specific legal obligation to provide information, okay, whether it be statutory or like again in court, a subpoena, you can't hide behind an NDA. You can't hide behind an NDA. Now, the NDA could prevent them potentially from like telling the general public about the stuff, right? But when it comes to investigations, like legal investigations and stuff like that, like if it becomes a point to where you refusing to give information becomes illegal for you to do that, well, you can't contract with someone to ensure that they do that if it's illegal. So I just wanted to. I've heard a couple of people, raise that, and so I just want to make everybody aware of that. So the NDA, yes, can prevent people from potentially talking about criminal activity to the general public. But when it comes to a legal obligation to another legal obligation to provide it, yeah, you can't contract to do something illegal, just so y'all know. So I hope that helps. Thanks for bringing that up. Will Graff kick out the prosecutors in 2 weeks? Would you once you're a judge? That's a very, very good question. Will Graff do it? I don't think I mean, let me say this, y'all, and this is just to be real honest with you. I haven't done a lot of digging into like the actual standard that judge is looking at when judging this. If it mostly hinges on whether the adult child is going to have to be a material or have to be a witness in order for the prosecution to prove their case or at least present their case as they state their case is. Yeah. So like when I look at the information, I don't see in there where they would have to have that adult child testify. And if that's the standard, if that's the make or break to being conflicted or not, then I don't think that they would be disqualified. But I'm telling you now, I don't know if that's all there is involved in the standard per se. I'd have to look. Okay. But that was kind of like when I was reading the briefs and things like that for this last hearing. That's kind of what I saw, or at least as it relates to the evidence that they were trying to exclude, the video 4.1. Let me do a little bit more digging in that before I really speak definitively on it. I tend to think my just initial reaction is that judge isn't going to disqualify the prosecutor's office. Now he did say in court, he said that he had not made up his mind at that hearing. Now judge could, I'm not calling him a liar, but he could have just not been telling the truth there. But he said he hadn't made up his mind and that it'll be February 24th. They're going to have like an actual open court hearing for him to issue his order. And so we'll obviously be covering all that. I do think the prosecutor's office should be disqualified in this. And why do I think that? Something just tells me that and it's hard for me to kind of really, if the adult child thing is like what is the impetus for disqualifying, solely, maybe not. But I want to say that I just think they should be disqualified just because of the way a lot of just the way this has been handled. Um, I feel that they're being so. My personal opinion on where it should be disqualified isn't based in the law. So let me just say that what I'm telling you right now is just based off the way I feel about them. I um I honestly think that because they're so into either they are into Charlie Kirk or they're so into pleasing the Trump administration or the governor that they're so hell bent on the death penalty, these things like that is what makes me. I don't think that they're approaching this death penalty case with the appropriate level of care, meaning that being unbiased and really taking a good objective view and approach to the how they're charging it, all those things. I don't think they're doing it, and I think it's because they're biased, and potentially some other stuff too, but potentially because they're biased. And that could be because of the adult child, but I think it's also related to the highly politicized climate in and around the whole event, which was of no thanks to our president and the governor at Utah, and all these people were really happy to jump right in from day one and make this just a whole political deal. That just doesn't feel right to me. And so I think because all that's occurred and under this prosecutor's tutelage or their handling of the case, that I would rather see some other state body competent to other DA's office, someone come in and do it. So that's my personal opinion on it. Oh, hold on. Susan asked a question. I've got to answer this for us sure now. Greg, what about if Tyler takes a plea to avoid death penalty and then wants to appeal because he might have been railroaded? So very good question. So my opinion on that, like I told you in the comments, I want to say probably the vast majority of plea bargains are not going to be appealable. There's and I want to say that there's been some other little bit rarer instances where plea bargains have allowed for appeal of maybe some very narrow issues. But in this context, I doubt they would let him appeal the underlying guilt. Attack the underlying guilt of the plea bargain, right? That's usually not what the deal is on those things. So I don't think we would see that here, Susan, but that is a great question. I'll just tell you, if I were Tyler's attorney, just kind of along what you were just saying, I don't see it, like, to be honest with you, even if we were to take everything that the prosecutor's saying is true, I still don't think that this is a death penalty case. I don't see the jury coming with the death penalty here. I just don't. I think it's both legally insufficient for the death penalty, and I'll formulate or more specifically formulate my thoughts in that direction and come share them with y'all. But I think from a legal standpoint, it doesn't fit the death penalty definition, and I just do not see a jury putting that young man to death. I just don't. I don't. And if we're to believe what Brandy and them told Barron about what they heard about from Tyler's family, that maybe only 2% of the stuff is true, or that they were only tangentially involved, I really don't think Tyler would get the death penalty, even if it did come to find out that somehow he made some kind of miraculous shot. I just don't. So anyways, hour 52 minutes, almost 2 hours. I'm going to let y'all go. As I stated, I will do those. I'll do at least one video tonight with one of those Trump videos, but we're going to be showing up tomorrow to talk about the media motion with Tyler Robinson on whether those proceedings are going to be shown to us or not, or how much. And I think it's all, I think they want the pleadings to be private, the proceedings to be private. More or less make this a totally private thing. And obviously I'm vehemently against that. So I'm going to get a good grip and report to y'all tomorrow, the legal arguments back and forth there. We'll discuss the prospects of what judge might do, because obviously, full privatization of the proceedings would be kind of an extreme measure to be taken. Obviously it's a spectrum, so many things in between can be taken. As we see, the court's kind of been doing it on the fly, making some things private, even within proceedings, doing some private testimony. So judge has been pretty good, as far as I've seen, about reacting real time to try to, protect Tyler's fair trial rights while, having transparency. I certainly think that it should all just be transparent in this instance. I really do. And I'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll talk about it tomorrow. God bless y'all. Thank y'all. Again, any like, share, comment, just getting the word out about the channel will be very much appreciated. And yeah, man, much love. I will be back tomorrow. I'll be getting the satellite, and yeah, looking good. So thank y'all. I'll be looking for that Trump video to come out tonight or early tomorrow morning, and I will return tomorrow afternoon. Much love. Thank y'all.